Hello and welcome to Louise Singleton Creations. In today's video, I'm going to be putting Resin Pro's heat-resistant Top Pro coating to the test. I'll be making coasters and a trivet, and I will be taking them to the kitchen for the heat test experiment. I was lucky enough to be sent all these lovely goodies by Resin Pro, so I will also be testing out the small bottles of Resin Pro's transparent and also the set of mica pigments, which are called the Saharah Holiday Mica pigments. Today's main project is kind of crazy and unusual, just like me really. But I like to try new things, and this idea was in my head, so let's give it a go and see what happens. For the main body of my coasters and my trivet, I'm going to be using this resin, which is the transparent resin. All of Resin Pro's resins are transparent as far as I'm aware. I've tried most of them, but this one's actually called transparent. It's just its name. It always seems a bit confusing when I call it transparent resin because they're all transparent. Anyway, I'm using the little pots that they sent me, so I didn't weigh the resin out because it's already, I'm just using the full bottle of A and B. But just for your information, the mixing ratio for this resin is 1 to 0.6, and you measure it by weight. And so your part B measurement will be 60% of your part A measurement. So if part A was 100 grams, part B would be 60 grams. Always check the mixing ratio on the bottle. 2 bottles the same size doesn't mean it's a 1-to-1. I really wanted to be able to do a project that used as many of these pigments as possible. It's the Saharah Holiday Mica powders, and they are really beautiful, and that's why I wanted to show you them all. And hence this crazy idea was born. Now, I've got 8 measuring cups. I've divided the resin equally between all the cups, and I've just added a small spoonful of powder to each one and mixing them all up. I use those tiny little plastic spoons, which are great for measuring out the pigment powder, and you can just wash them afterwards. I really love those. Okay, all my colours are mixed, and you can see, luckily I've got the right camera angle for you to be able to see how beautiful those colours are. And I'm using a mould which I used ages ago. You may have seen it in another video, and I've never used it again since, but it's really good. And it's not actually a mould. I'm calling it a mould because I use it as a mould, but it's actually, I think it's called a roasting sheet, and you're supposed to put your meat on the other side so that all the fat drains between all the pyramids. But I saw an opportunity to use it as a mould, and so that's what I'm doing. And I'm randomly pouring the colours into square shapes to make my coasters. I decided, I think I did 6 by 6, the squares, pyramids, 6 pyramids by 6 pyramids. Don't know what the measurement is for that. Anyway, I'm just making squares, pouring the colours randomly until I've got my coaster shapes. And I'm also going to do a large rectangular trivet because I want to test the the Top Pro heat resistant resin at the end with a pan, so that I can really show you how good the Top Pro resin is. So yeah, there's going to be that experiment at the end, and that's why I'm making the trivet. And as always, I've sped up quite a lot of this video, especially this part, because it did take me a very long time. And that's the great thing about the transparent resin. I think the pot life is 1 hour, 20 minutes, and that's a really long time for getting your work done. And so that's why I love it, because you don't have to rush. Right, after I'd poured all those little pyramids, I had quite a lot of resin left, so I decided to make a coaster. And, it's just absolutely typical. I spent so long doing the other ones that you've just seen, but this one ended up being my favourite. And all I'm doing is pouring it all in, quite, just one on top of the other. And I love this more than I like the other ones, so yeah, it is typical. It always happens. The ones that you throw together work out the best. Anyway, I'm just layering them one on top of the other. I'm being quite careful not to mix the primary colours all together. Like, I don't put the purple next to the yellow because that would make brown, and because the three primary colours obviously make brown. And so I'm always quite mindful of mixing the three primary colours together. So purple, yellow, red and green, they would make brown. So yeah, I'm just careful about that. But other than that, they're just poured in and left. I also still had some left after that, so I just chucked some into a little tea light holder mould that I had. Obviously, I won't be putting a tea light in it, but it can be used for something, I don't know. But it's always good to have a mould handy, just in case you have leftover resin. And the other thing I do, once I've finished, I know a lot of people turn the pots upside down to help it drain and to make it easier to clean them. But I leave the empty pots like that, and the leftover little bits of resin gather, and you can take them out when they're cured, and you've got lots of different coloured discs. And I'm collecting those discs of resin because I want to make something with them. I'm not sure what yet, but I think I might be able to use them. Okay, so we're back to the coasters and the trivet. And all I'm doing here is pouring some more resin over the top. It's the transparent one again. And all this does is it holds all those little pyramids together so that I can demold it all in one piece. You do have to be quite careful because it kind of shrinks away from the silicone a little bit in places. If you're not careful, you do need to keep checking it after you've poured it and spread it all out. Just check it from different angles and check that all of it's covered and all those little pyramids are joined together. It doesn't have to be particularly neat at this stage. All it needs to do is hold the bits together, and it doesn't matter if you go over the edge into the pyramids that are alongside the coasters and the trivet. That really doesn't matter. And I did actually. After I stopped filming, I actually poured some more of the resin on, and it did kind of go everywhere, but it didn't matter. Okay, after 6 hours, it's ready to demold. And all I did was I flipped it over and carefully, at first, just released a few pyramids at a time. You do need to be quite careful with it and gentle so you don't, separate those pyramids, because it was only a thin layer holding them all together. And then just once you've released a few, it's easy to pull off. Right then, so here they are demolded, and as you can see, I went over the edges when I was pouring that top coat of resin, but it doesn't matter because all you need to do is get a sharp, strong pair of scissors and it cuts through really easily, and you can just trim all the edges with the scissors and you're ready for the next step. You can keep those little pyramids and use them for something else, so nothing goes to waste. The next job is to make a frame to enclose the coaster so you can pour the rest of the resin in to make a solid coaster. I have a sheet of acetate here, and I'm just measuring around the coaster using the grid on my cutting mat. and deciding what size I want it and just drawing the guidelines. Then I just cut the squares out with a craft knife and a ruler, and we were ready for the next step. Next, I added a piece of tape to each side. It's the strong tape, duct tape. I added that to each side, ready to attach the side panels. I recently bought some new blinds for my windows, and the blinds came in the clear boxes, and so what I did was I cut the boxes into smaller pieces so I could store them away and use the plastic from those boxes for doing projects like this, and it just works out perfectly, and you don't have to buy expensive things like plexiglass or acrylic sheet, which I do use quite a lot. I do like something if it's free. So as you can see, I'm just adding a piece to each side, and then I can fold it up and join it together at the corners, and then we're ready to put the pyramid coaster in and pour in the resin. I'm speeding up quite a lot of the video, which I do quite a lot in my videos because I don't like the thought of you getting bored. So yeah, I'm just speeding this bit up because it's quite simple. I'm sure you can work it out. And we're ready. I've mixed some of the transparent resin again, and I'm just doing a thin layer, just enough to cover the bottom of that enclosure. And because I've used the plastic for the packaging from my window blinds, the last thing I want to do is use my torch because it will melt them very quickly. And so instead of using a heat gun, I'm just getting my little spray with isopropyl alcohol in and giving it a quick spray. You don't need a lot, a little spray to disperse any bubbles. And then I'm taking the pyramids and just adding them at an angle. I'm using that little cocktail stick just to hold it up and drop it down slowly. And the reason I did it from an angle was to avoid getting lots of air pockets trapped in there. And once it was in, I poked it around for quite a while actually, and I was trying to peek through the gaps to check to see if I could see any air bubbles. And if I saw any air bubbles, I just kept on poking until they found the way to the edge and escaped. After that, I just poured some more resin on just until the tops of the pyramids were covered and I couldn't see any little pointy bits poking out. Then I just repeated the process for the trivet and the other coaster. Right then, it's time for the Resin Pro Top Pro, which is the heat-resistant resin. I use this all the time and I love it, but it's recently changed. It used to be a 1 to 0.8 ratio, but now it's a 1 to 1 resin, and it makes it a lot simpler. However, they do have a really good tip if you look into the details on the website. And if you have a really humid environment on the day that you're pouring your top pro, you can change the ratio to 1 part A and then 0.8 part B. And that's because any heat-resistant resin is sensitive to water. And so if you've got a humid atmosphere, it doesn't work well and you get the Armine blush. And they do actually say if the humidity is past a certain level, and I can't think what it is at the moment, not to use it at all because of that problem. What I often do is put it to cure in a little cubby hole, like a shelf which I've got, which is covered. And I've got a little mini dehumidifier in there, and that really helps to make sure you get a nice clear finish. But anyway, I didn't do that this time. I just left it on the worktop and I used I did the 1 to 0.8 ratio because it was a humid day. Now, you might have noticed that it looks quite yellow. Don't panic. I've seen a lot of people panicking about this on social media. They say, what am I going to do? Should I send it back? It's yellow. Don't worry. It's supposed to be that way. It's normal. And when you've poured it and it's cured, it won't be yellow. It does have a definite yellow tinge to it, as you see it there in the cup, but it's not a problem. Just carry on and you'll see when this is cured that there's no yellowness, sorry, it's a hard word to say. No yellowness to the finished product. And this is sped up, by the way. I didn't really stir that fast, but I did stir for 2 minutes and that's why I had to speed it up. Right, I want it out of the frame before I pour the heat-resistant top coat on, and look how easily it comes off. There was no mould release on there. I just used the plastic and the acetate just as it was, and yeah, it just peels off. It's great. And so I was wanting to try something different, and it didn't turn out exactly how it was in my imagination. But I do like it. I love it from the side. If you can, it's kind of hard to capture it on the camera, but it looks really good from the sides. And I can imagine if a guest came around and they had the coaster next to them at the table, they'd be picking it up and wanting to look at it from all angles. It's one of those kind of things. Anyway, I'm using a sanding block just to neaten the edges because they were poking up a little bit. And it's really easy to do with the sanding blocks, and you get a nice result with them. I can put a link to those in my Amazon storefront as well because they're handy to have. And then it will be ready for the resin. So all I do is pour a puddle of the Top Pro resin in the middle and then manipulate it to the edges just with a cocktail stick, trying not to scratch the surface of the coaster. I just kind of drag the surface of the resin rather than, using the cocktail stick along the surface of the coaster. And I don't use a torch with the Top Pro resin. That is one of the things that they do specify in the instructions, is not to use a torch or a heat gun with it. And the bubbles tend to just disperse by themselves. I repeated the process for the other coasters and for the trivet, and I just wanted to quickly show you the results before we move on to the kitchen for the heat test. If you know me by now, you know I like to do things that are different and quite unique, and these are definitely that. I don't know if I'll be doing it again, but it was fun to try. Now then, this coaster, which I used all my leftover little bits for, I think turned out really great. And now it had quite a lot of negative space in the middle, and so I made the graphic to go in the middle with just a sentiment on a circle, and I printed it on my laser printer onto clear adhesive film, which I will link to in my Amazon storefront for you. I will probably, I'll give this to my patrons as well. The PDF document, so my patrons can print it out. If you're with me on Patreon, you can have that for your coasters. And it just helps to fill up that space. And I did put those little gems on just to fill the gap. However, I made a bit of a mess with the glue. Anyway, I love how those pigments shimmer and shine, and how the colours have actually kept quite separate. And I was quite surprised. I thought they might just mingle together and make a bit of a splodgy mess, but they didn't. And I really do love that coaster. I was really pleased with it. And as you can hopefully see, the surface is really clear and shiny. There might be the odd little bit of dust in there, I'm not sure, but it might not be perfect. I very rarely get absolutely perfect, but that's not the resin, that's me. But you can see the results of that Top Pro from Resin Pro are fantastic, and the yellowness that we spoke about earlier on doesn't make any problem at all. You can't tell, and it looks perfectly clear to me. And here's the little pot that I made with the leftover resin. Now, the surface of the mould was dull, so the pot came out dull. And instead of using spray varnish to brighten it up and make it shiny, I decided it would be a good idea to use some leftover resin, and it didn't work. So yeah, the surface of that isn't great, but I love the colours. It's kind of peacocky. Right, let's put this heat-resistant top coat to the test. Now, it's not going to be a very scientific experiment because I didn't have a thermometer. But the Resin Pro Top Pro coating is supposed to be heat-resistant up to 200 degrees C. So I'm hoping it will be absolutely fine with my pan of boiling water. So here I'm just showing you what the surface of everything is like before I put anything on it, so you can see the before and after. Right, so you can see the pan is vigorously boiling, just so you know I'm not cheating. And all I'm going to do is place it onto the trivet and then transfer some of that into my cup because I forgot to boil the kettle and put the cup on the coaster. Okay, I left them on there until they were cool, and very scientifically you can see me doing the sticking your finger in it test, like all the best scientists do. Just to prove that it had cooled down and it had been on there all the time. And there we have the coaster afterwards, and I can't see a mark, can you? I don't know. I think I did see a line, but I think that was the edge of the adhesive film I'd put on, you know, with the sentiment on. I don't think it was from the cup. And let's have a look at the trivet. It was a little bit wet at first, so you might see some wetness on there, but there's no marks from the pan. And so I consider that a success. Maybe I should have tried it with something even hotter, but yeah, couldn't think what at the time. It passes the pan of boiling water test, and maybe I can think of something else to try for another experiment. Maybe I'm thinking, I don't know, frying pan or something. I don't know much about this kind of thing. Would that be hotter? I don't know. I suppose it would be. I'm waffling now, aren't I? Anyway, as you can see, it was a success, and the Resin Pro Top Pro heat resistant coating works very well for trivets and coasters and placemats and anything else with a temperature up to 200 degrees C. I really hope you've found this video useful, and if you've got any questions, don't be scared to ask. Just leave me a question in the comments and I'll be happy to answer if I can. I always try my best to answer your questions. And until next time, stay safe and keep crafting. Bye for now.